I was sketching ideas for a new illustration the other day and looked back at some of my older art, not even from that long ago, painted over this winter. I feel more confident in my process now and was wondering why. Art improvement can be frustrating if you feel stuck or overwhelmed, but it's also incredibly rewarding and motivating whenever I learn something new. So in this art vlog, I'll just chat about what really helped me, what gave me confidence, all while looking back at the cold winter months spent painting at my desk. Because honestly, that's the reality of my life as an illustrator. I'd asked in a post if you'd be interested in seeing more of the boring parts, the behind the scenes. So much of what I do are just thumbnail sketches, collecting ideas, color and pose studies, and then hours upon hours of painting, often multiple pieces at once. Thank you to everyone who was excited about this. You made my day and motivated me to dig through my art footage. I hope you grab your own sketchbooks, paper, pencils, or brushes and join me for this quite long art vlog. Here I'm sketching composition ideas for a book interior illustration of Fangs for Nothing. My sketches, especially color studies, have become a much bigger focus over the last year. They make such a difference for the final painting and are worth every second I put into them. If you ever feel intimidated by a painting idea, give it a try as a miniature first. I like doing these without references to see which areas I'm unsure about. Do I need to take pictures of my own cat at a particular angle for the cat on our main character's lap here? Or maybe I have to look up flickering candles and subsurface scattering. A lot of my sketchbook practice is stuff like this. Blobs of paint, color swatches, quick studies in pencil or ink to prepare for an illustration, so that I can answer some of the basic questions before starting to paint the actual piece, where new questions will present themselves along the way. I've mentioned Fangs for Nothing before. The illustrations that I painted for this limited edition book show up here or there in my videos. Now the Kickstarter is in full swing, already exceeding my expectations, so there's new bonus art that I get to paint as well. I'll share some sketches for the new interior illustrations later in the video, so that I can keep all this footage chronological. And hopefully that means there's some improvement visible as time passes. These kinds of color thumbnails are incredibly rough, but they help me so much. You can see that each of these has a different undertone to the color palette. I'd already sketched multiple options for the overall composition, just with pencil. So here I'm really just figuring out details, where to place highlights, where strong contrast would work. A lot of what I share on this channel is very simple. I like filming my sketchbook practice, or experiments with new art supplies or different styles, or even art hauls. Something to film on a calm weekend morning or on a day off. And this playful side of art is an important part of my overall practice. To de-stress, find new inspiration, and just as a hobby I enjoy and want to share. But while the sketches and experiments teach me new things and give me energy, I get to make fun illustrations, to sell at art markets and book fairs, and connect with my surroundings through travel sketches. It can feel a bit disconnected if it's all I do. Like endless little drops in an ocean. I love sketches and have shared my sketchbooks full of them, but in the end, I never learn more about my art and style and approach than when I actually start and finish illustrations. Over this winter, I also got into fountain pen sketches. I think I got my first fountain pen sometime in autumn, and I just really enjoy the scribbly lines and different color options that I've found so far. These kind of sketches are great as warm-ups, and my warm-ups here did actually have a goal. I used the characters that I'd just sketched in those color studies as inspiration, trying to find shapes and expressions for them with this simple line drawing. This entire art vlog really shows my usual approach to filming. I'm always really excited when I'm doing the sketches because they are so simple to film, right? They don't take a lot of time, I don't have to be super careful, it's all just about trying out new things, so they are really easy to film. But as soon as I then switch to the actual illustrations, I really want to focus. I don't want to be distracted by the camera. And so I have a lot of footage that kind of ends after the first brush strokes are placed. Though I do think that those first layers are actually the most interesting. It's when a lot of that problem solving that I started during the color studies happens in more detail. Over time, my underpaintings or just the first color pass also have become much more detailed. I purposefully just use small brushes because if I just block in the entire illustration with a large brush, like an underpainting that covers everything, because I work in acrylics, I'll have to paint over every single part anyway. I just found out that I got a table at the Jeju Book Fair. I'm really happy about it. I wasn't sure if I would get in this year, because there's been a lot of applications apparently. There are only a few weeks in between getting the acceptance email and the actual book fair, so with printing times, you have to order this stuff quite a bit in advance, right? I decided against making a new art zine. I'm just too busy with other stuff, and even just reprinting these and then folding and cutting all of them will take quite a while. So I'll bring the Switzerland art zines, which funnily enough have been quite popular at book fairs here as well, because I often meet people who have traveled maybe to the same areas or that are just more curious about other locations because, well, they are familiar with Jeju. So kind of both of them sell equally well, which I'm a bit surprised about, but very happy with, of course. So you have the small size and the big size of both, and I usually package them quite simply like this. So the zine always comes with a postcard. I'll have to fold and cut so many zines, but also have to make new cat maps, is what I call them in English. These are actually my best-selling item at Korean art markets here on Jeju or like at book fairs. They are watercolor illustrations printed in this kind of poster style that I then fold like a good old-fashioned map. I focused very much on nature for these. So there are flowers, because flowers here on Jeju bloom at different times than they would on the Korean mainland. There are all the different kind of famous citrus fruits, mandarins, so halabong, hagyeol, cheonhaeyang, garahyang, hwanggeumyang, all of these different types that come out. So I wrote each name and when they are in season. And then the last one in the set. These are my samples, so they are kind of falling apart. This one is the Autumn Guide, the volcanic hills here reinterpreted as very lazy cats. I really like the Gomen Autumn, which really just means black hill or dark hill, so it's a black cat. And it has this view of all the autumn cats in front of Halasan on the back. So I ordered, I think, 100 of these, so 100 of each. And I remember folding so many of them for last year's book fair. I was literally standing at my table and in between selling had to fold new ones. So this time I want to be prepared. I want to fold enough. I sell these as a set, so there's also a cute sticker that goes with it that I need to reprint before the book fair. And I think all of this will keep me busy. I'll probably watch a really long movie or an entire season of a show or something in the background and just fold maps and scenes for a day. And I think that's a smarter approach than trying to somehow squeeze in another art zine or new product before the book fair, because I'd have to send that to the printer pretty much in 2 days. Though I couldn't resist and make one new thing. This is a little notebook with just blank pages. I really like that it has thread binding, this cute blue thread, and I used illustrations from my art zine for it, for these kind of pastel-y colors. And the idea is to maybe sell these together, because a lot of people tell me that they'd like to try travel sketching and don't really know where to start, and all I can really answer is that I too started with just random pen doodles sitting at a cafe, maybe more like a diary than landscape painting. And something like this, just a blank little notebook, is enough. And to just get started, because it's so much fun to kind of see your surroundings when you're out and about, even if it's just a friend's house, a neighborhood cafe, or running errands, and trying to capture what you see in some shape or form. Oh, and I nearly forgot this particular illustration of the small black cat hiding among the hydrangeas. is kind of a favorite. I usually fold the maps so that this one is in front. I think it turned out really cute. It's my personal favorite as well. So I think I'll print also a mini postcard with this one on the front. And I am thinking of using the Korean traditional paints that I bought a couple weeks ago to paint a small hydrangea flower to put on the back of that postcard, like a little stamp. So that's another new product, and I'll also need some stickers, packaging supplies, a couple more reprints of other stuff I'm running low on. Even without making anything really big new, I'll be busy. The book fair is on the 28th and 29th of March on that weekend. If by any chance you live on Jeju Island, come say hi. I'll be there somewhere and I'll post about my booth location in that giant hall at some point once I know more. I often come back to my Strathmore mixed media journal when I want to sketch something that I'm not sure if I want to scan it or not. The paper has just enough of a fine texture that it doesn't get in the way of making prints. I've, after all, drawn all of my art scene illustrations for the Jeju Wanderings art scene in this, while some other sketchbooks I'd rather keep at just doodles, studies, and composition sketches. I used some of the lessons I'd learned about traditional Korean painting, Minhwa, and adapted a hydrangea flower to that style. I'll use this one as a little stamp detailing on the back of the postcard. And I think I'll actually make this the Patreon print for March. By the time those snail mail letters have traveled to wherever they need to go, the hydrangeas will actually be in full bloom here on Jeju. And if you have some where you live, that should also be kind of the right timing for that. I won't be only bringing my art scenes and travel sketches that are kind of Jeju themed. I do plan on also bringing my Dracula art scene, some of the postcards that I made for it, as well as a couple other fantasy art prints. I usually have to keep that quite separate because while this is both part of my art practice, the landscape sketches in gouache and the fantasy art that I do for work, but also for personal enjoyment and creative fulfillment and whatever else you might call that obsession. But it can look very different, right? Especially if you just approach a table and then on one side there's Dracula and on the other side there are cute coffee cups. But at least the color palettes are kind of similar at this point, with the more muted, limited approach on both ends. So I have to figure out a way to make it all look nice together, how to separate it, how to transition from one side of that table, from one art style or one facet of my art style into the next. It's funny how I've come back around to using some of the same art materials, but for Korean traditional paintings I've been using the same inkstone again that I used for all the tiny vignette drawings of these Dracula scenes. This is still a favorite of mine. Lizard fashion. Of course, a lot of gouache art back then as well. This Dracula booklet really captures all my favorite media, the sketchy gouache, the simple line drawings, and the much more rendered acrylic paintings. And even pencil. I actually really miss doing large pencil drawings that are finished and not just sketches. Here I really like the textures that I created by using graphite powder, a kneadable eraser, and then regular pencil on top. I want to do something like this again. Then the partner illustration for it, here, with these kind of abstract shapes. This is another favorite of mine, the Blueful Lady, Lucy Western Raw. So these will travel to the book fair as well. I still really like this illustration here, also done in ink and gouache, which is a fun combination. My cat is here. Okay, the entire table just shook as he jumped up and down. I started off the new year by signing up for an oil painting class for imaginative realism. The class is by Ryan Pancoast and I'm using, for now, acrylics to follow along. I love his oil painting style, but with my cat and this being an open space attached to our kitchen and where we eat and everything, I'm not super comfortable bringing out oil paints, especially now in winter when I can't really open the windows. But despite using acrylics, I've already found the first 2 modules that I watched and followed along with super helpful. I did these color wheels, but I applied the exercise to current paintings I'm working on. This is one project, another book illustration commission. It's a very limited palette. We are focusing very heavily on black and white and then icy backgrounds, and we decided to go with the teal and blue option. That's not actually a color palette I work all that often with, so I thought this is the perfect opportunity to paint some limited color palette color wheels. You can see that this entire paper has very much already been used for other projects. This is usually where I clip these tiny canvases too, so I can kind of adjust the height and placement on my table easel more easily and don't smudge all over. So just a Canson Montwall watercolor pad that I don't really use for anything else, so I thought I might as well use it as a painting background surface. Once, during an art class, I'd heard the advice to create your own projects. Not just single pieces, but connected pieces, no matter what that looks like. Something of your own, something that you can call your own and where you can experiment and truly find your art style, independent of clients. Now, in an ideal world, that would be very simple to do, right? But it took me over a year to really get the Dracula art scene together, which was kind of my personal project after I'd heard that recommendation and it resonated so much with me. You can interpret that advice in so many different ways, but for me it all came down to diving into a subject I was passionate about, and that's how the Windows into Dracula art scene happened. I'm still incredibly happy with it, even now when I look back and maybe see some style issues or even mistakes. But looking back, it really solidified so much about my creative direction, the media I work in, and my style overall. Something else I've been exploring more over winter are different surfaces to paint on. I've already mentioned in previous videos that I now switched to Arches hot press paper for most of my illustration work, just because it saves me so much time after scanning with its invisible texture. But I'm also experimenting with different ways of sealing pencil lines and prolonging my acrylic drying and blending times. There are some really interesting articles on muddy colors, which is a great resource no matter the kind of art you personally pursue. I've linked my two favorites in the description, just information about mixed media, how to combine them, how to use acrylic gel medium to make colored pencils work, for example. Here I tried out soft gel gloss, GAC 100, glazing fluid and clear gesso, which I really don't like because it roughens the overall texture. I prefer the very smooth finish of the soft gel gloss, and you can see how I can push the paint around for much longer and create these very transparent layers. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to improvement. There might be some basic art skills to study, but we all have different goals, styles, and weaknesses. But I truly believe that there's a point when all the sketches and studies of fundamentals hit a limit and we're studying fundamentals without actually creating any art. I've definitely fallen into that trap of painting more studies than actual finished illustrations. I learn so much more from every finished illustration, painting, or drawing than I do from 10 sketches. Better even multiple illustrations that all explore a similar theme. What would that look like for you? Is there an idea or project you've been daydreaming and sketching about for a long time but never felt ready to actually paint? Maybe a picture book that's still just a vague idea, or a graphic novel but you're just resketching environments and characters, never actually finishing a page. If you want to paint portraits, studies of loomies and pencil sketches will be helpful, but you'll actually have to paint those portraits to find brushwork, colors, and style choices that resonate with you and grow along with your practice. I've even found that practicing at small sizes then doesn't really translate all that well to larger formats, because I need to use different brushes, the detailing level goes up, and blending also has to be handled differently. It helped me so much to give myself these personal projects, from small to large, travel sketch scenes to Dracula illustrations, or the Silmarillion art series that I'm still working on, and actually just complete them in all their imperfections. Here I'm sharing some snippets from a character illustration I'd recently worked on for a client. This has a very simple palette, and while the drawing is small, I really like how the faces turned out. There's a simplicity to it all in the color palette and the composition as well. But it makes me want to try even more limited palette options in my acrylic paintings. Since I'd coated the arch paper with soft gel gloss, like in my little samples where I tried out different options, the acrylic paint went on really smoothly, which helps a lot if you work at such small sizes. For final details, I also brought out some colored pencils. Not all colored pencils will work on acrylic paint. The Derwent Drawing and Derwent Lightfast are some of the ones that I find easiest to use. But since I did use some matte medium and also some ultra matte medium by Liquitex, that changed the finish of my final acrylic layer and made it easier for the colored pencils to latch onto the surface. I for sure want to experiment more with that, as colored pencils bring some really interesting textures to the final illustration. There's a small shop on Jeju Island that only sells pencils and drawing supplies. They have some really fun options from around the globe, and I ended up with only 4. I controlled myself, though I will be back to check out the art scene shop right next to it, which was sadly closed that day. I'd discovered them first at a book fair last fall, and now with the Jeju book fair coming up, but knowing that they wouldn't be there, I felt the need to get some fun tools. I really love both the 4B Cretacolor and the 8B Gekkoso pencil. They're great for rough sketching, and I can't wait to test out this really strange oily pencil by Koh-i-Noor. You'll see both the Gekkoso and Cretacolor show up in my next sketch in just a minute. The Fangs for Nothing Kickstarter by author Stephanie Holmes, who is creating a limited edition of her book, had just unlocked a stretch goal: new interior art. I'm excited to be back because at this point I'd painted multiple other illustrations in the meantime and learned new things along the way. So how would that influence my new interior art? I've been looking for my Strathmore toned paper pad for the longest time. I couldn't find it when I filmed my sketchbook tour at the end of last year. Then finally I discovered it stuck behind a stretched canvas. So, of course, I immediately wanted to use it now for new sketches. I already had some first rough layout sketches ready to go because we were pretty optimistic about that first reward tier. There are more sketches for other interior art I have ideas for, but we have one more very ambitious stretch goal to reach for that, so I'm not sure if I'll actually get to draw those. If you want to go take a look at the Kickstarter and maybe support it in some way, get your own illustrated version, prints, and all the wonderful other art goodies created by wonderful artists, I've put a link in the description, and by the time I'm posting this art vlog, there's less than a week to go. Now, there were questions to answer with the sketch. How exactly do I want to pose her arm and the candelabra? How poofy can I make the sleeves for this elaborate design I had in mind? How should I paint the translucent material of the nightgown? And where are the highlights, the deepest shadows, the most saturated colors? It's studies like these that are incredibly helpful for me. Instead of trying to learn everything about anatomy and lighting and similar fundamentals all at once, I'll look at the muscles on a flexed, bent arm or how lighting passes through textiles. And then hopefully those will stick around somewhere in the back of my mind for future illustrations too. I love gouache for my sketches and hop back and forth between acrylics and gouache nowadays for my color studies. Gouache for the simplicity and immediacy, acrylics if I'm curious about my exact color palette and pigments. At this point, I have an overall color palette in all Fangs for Nothing illustrations, with a lot of violet and magenta undertones from alizarin crimson to match the book's overall mood, warm yellows to match the cover, red and violet as the theme color for our main character Winnie, and blue and black for Allergy. So I was less concerned with the exact acrylic mixtures and more curious about the lighting. So perfect for gouache on toned paper. Toned paper takes care of the mid-tone already, and I can measure my highlights and shadows against this neutral backdrop. Colored pencils, layered over gouache, and even acrylics have become a staple. I want to mention the Derwent drawing one more time for really packing a punch on top of gouache, but it's the Derwent Lightfast that I also reach for a lot. They're a bit more subtle, but still strong enough to work even on acrylics. The Mars Violet and Mars Orange shade of the Derwent Lightfast go so well together, perfect for warm shadows and saturated spotlight edges. I kind of want to get more neutral colors like those for finishing touches on gouache and acrylics. Do you have any shades you love and can recommend? The Dracula art that I mentioned showed me where I want to go with my illustrations. The stylized approach, not too focused on realism, with some graphic design elements in my compositions over natural poses. But it's also a thematic focus. I got comfortable in that world of historical costuming, the gothic horror and romance elements, and an underlying darkness or flair for the dramatic, even in a vibrant or lighter illustration. I feel like a lot of the commissions I've gotten since, as well as personal projects, still reflect a lot of that influence. I have so much to learn and improve on, techniques I struggle with, mistakes I make, faces I have to paint over, and I want to get faster on top of that. But actually finishing all those paintings and even documenting some of that process here taught me a lot about how I like to paint, how I can approach each new illustration from sketch to final touches. And I hope you find an approach that works for you, no matter what your art style and art goals are. I also hope you were sketching and painting along with me, and I would love to hear about any project you want to work on, even if you're maybe intimidated by it. I'm always intimidated by new illustrations myself, and then enjoy every step of that process all the more. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.